Hi, my name is Emery Rund, and today I will be talking about the misappropriation of Native American culture and pop music. What is racism? Well, I chose two definitions to speak about because I thought they both were really good. But the first one is racism is when an individual or group of people are judged, discriminated against, or disliked by others because of their race. My second definition is racism can also be defined as the belief that human beings can be divided into groups based on their racial characteristics, like your skin color, and that those groups can be superior and inferior to other groups because of those characteristics. Racism is a big problem found all over the world and has gone on for centuries. I will be discussing these different forms of racism: racial antipathy, cultural misappropriation, playing Indian, singing redface, idealized sympathy, blackface minstrelsy, and cultural confusion. Racial antipathy is basically the same thing as racism. It is defined as a passionate dislike toward an individual or group of people solely based on the color of their skin. Unfortunately, there is still an alarming amount of racial antipathy in today's societies. To understand cultural misappropriation, you also need to know what cultural appropriation is. Cultural appropriation is when someone from one culture represents another culture as if it was their own. Cultural misappropriation is when someone appropriated a culture wrongfully. So this would be if someone was participating in appropriation with the goal to make a profit from or to mock a specific culture. One form of cultural appropriation that is usually unintentional is the practice of playing Indian. Playing Indian is when someone who isn't Native American dresses up or plays the role as Native American for a certain theme or event. Some examples of this are women dressing up as Sacagawea for Halloween, or when children run around and chase each other while pretending to be cowboys and Indians. Although these are unintentional acts of cultural appropriation, they are still extremely offensive to Indigenous people. The first known displays of cultural misappropriation was at the World's Fair in 1851. This led to a massive public interest in the Native American culture. Native American cultural misappropriation became a common theme within the film and music industry. America's fascination with the American Indian culture began in the early 1900s when they started creating Western films. You can find loads of cultural misappropriation in these movies, and most of them used white actors to play the roles of Indigenous people, essentially stealing the American Indian culture. Popular music, also known as pop, is another outlet for cultural misappropriation. Pop music is a very common way people participate in cultural appropriation and misappropriation against Native Americans. And it is also very common for some of these culturally appropriation to be unintentional. This type of cultural appropriation is known as singing redface. Singing redface is when a non-native person imitates a Native American in a song by adopting their language, characteristics, and norms. This term is problematic because it promotes racial slurs and mocks the Native American language and culture. Another similar form of cultural appropriation is blackface minstrelsy. Blackface is racist depictions of African Americans in form of entertainment. This is basically the same thing as redface, but with African American culture instead. Although it was a very popular form of entertainment back in the day, it is now extremely offensive and is socially unacceptable. Cultural confusion is false information that is spread by storytelling, entertainment, and culture that causes the audience to be unsure what is real about a culture. The continuation of inaccurate Native American stereotypes can lead to mass cultural confusion, which will make our society take steps backwards in the effort to stop cultural appropriation. An example of cultural confusion is when Cher performed her song Half Breed. During this performance, Cher dressed up as a Native American wearing traditional indigenous clothing, including a headdress. And although she is part Native American, she never publicly shared that prior to her performance, so that caused a lot of cultural confusion. Her fans were unaware of her Native heritage, and it caused some to believe that Cher was taking part in cultural appropriation. Another famous artist to have participated in singing Redface was Annette Funicello. Annette Funicello was a child star who grew up alongside her fans. Annette was known for her pop songs, and in the 1960s, she came out with a single called Indian Giver. This song, which was once very popular, is now controversial and offensive. In this song, Annette is participating in singing Redface because she is not Native American, but she is dressed up in their traditional clothing. Her song also resembles the beat of Native American music, which is another way to appropriate. She also uses the slur squaw. This term has multiple meanings, but all of them are offensive to Native American people, especially women. Cultural misappropriation of Native Americans has been an issue for over 100 years. You can find this misappropriation most commonly in old Western films and in pop music. Throughout the years, it became a trend for people to take other cultures and represent them as their own. We now know as a society that this is offensive and wrong, and hopefully, if we continue to spread awareness, these forms of racism will continue to decrease. Thank you so much for listening.